Hello, good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Toolbox. My name is Sarah Lynn. I'm the founder and head tutor of Bettering Youth, an academic tutoring company that blends in emotional well-being coaching, and the very proud host of the Mindful Toolbox. Every month, we present a webinar based upon a topic that helps to support the mental well-being of your children and your families. So today's specific topic is going to be looking at healthy boundaries, specifically looking within the exam season. As May is just around the corner and June is not far behind, we are definitely at the beginning of exam season. And as I'm sure you can tell, if you are a parent of a student who is preparing for an upcoming exam, they can be a very stressful situation. And so today, my hope is that we're going to dive into the ways that we can support our children in building healthy boundaries that take into consideration their mental and emotional well-being as well. So let's jump right in. Today, we're going to be talking about exam season stress. We're going to discuss what boundaries are, why they are necessary, and how we can lower the exam season stress by setting these boundaries. Before we really dive in, though, I want to talk about the conversation between life-work balance. Now, ever since I even entered the workforce before I was out of school, I always felt as though this dichotomy will never be at peace with one another. It will never be completely 50-50. And I've upheld that same belief right through until now. But instead of it being like this pedometer shows right now, as it being completely over to one side or completely over to the other, I do believe that there are seasons where we can be shifted more into the life stage, or seasons where it could be shifted more into the work stage. I appreciate that it may never be 50-50, but it's so important for us to know what we need during each of those seasons so we can continue to thrive. So way before I even entered the workforce as a classroom teacher, I still felt as though I would be, thinking about an exam thesis or an essay thesis while I was out with my friends. Or I would be sitting at school trying to study and I'd be thinking about plans with my friends. It's so odd to me how we expect these two parts of our lives to remain in silos separate of each other when there really are things that kind of mesh and blend together. So for me, the best way that we can approach this situation or this tug of war, polar opposite vision of these two spaces that we spend time is to really understand what we need to thrive when we're in either season. So let's dig into that a little bit more. When we're talking about it always being about work, when our odometer is way over onto that work side, we tend to put ourselves way down at the bottom of the list. We might have this vision that the only way that we will succeed is if we give it 110%. And I 110% agree with that, but to an extent, because when we only focus on that singular task, for example, studying for GCSEs or the 11 plus exam or SATs tests, we may end up studying quite late. And so our sleep cycle goes askew. We might feel really overwhelmed. And so our anxiety levels have increased. We might feel as though we need to spend all hours of the day studying. And so we spend less time with our family and friends. Our hygiene can change. We can become more irritable, and we may even see changes of weight. These are all things that I want you to be aware of as your child goes through these exam seasons, because these are common signs that they are putting way too much pressure on themselves in one particular area of their life. We don't expect it to be balanced, but we need to understand how we can still maintain our well-being while we're in a season of work. So let's get into the busy culture of it all. For some reason, we have this idea, vision, belief within the Western world that it's important for us to be in this rat race. It's important for us to have a to-do list that just never ends. We brag about it. We talk about how busy we are. And yet, does the person who spend 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, are they as productive as the person who works 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, 5 days a week? There are many studies that tell us that that's just not the case, because the person who is working for 10 hours feels the leisure of 10 hours and fills the 10 hours with stuff to do. The person who only has 4 gets things done because they only have a limited amount of time. The busiest people, like the actual busiest people, productive people, tend to be the most productive because they prioritize things. They set things in deadlines. They keep themselves building that momentum versus getting a little distracted and procrastinating and trying to fill up those 10 hours. So it's really important that we are truly filling up our study hours with productive studying. And if you're looking for studying techniques, be sure to head over to our blog. So we've got a Studying 101 blog series up there that's been really helpful. We've been getting lots of positive feedback on it. So busy culture can also lead into overwhelm and anxiety, especially as we're coming up to exams. It feels as though the weight of the world might be on our shoulders. When we go into an anxiety response, a couple of things happen. And this is something that we discussed in the second episode of the Mindful Toolbox way back in November in the episode called Overcoming Overwhelm. And the anxiety response, of course, it's not linear, but in a perfect world, this is how we would explain it. The amygdala, which is the guard dog of the brain, the part that is responsible for our fight, flight, or freeze response, it gets triggered. Just like a dog, it will start barking. Our body will start to go into a panic mode, right? You might sense things happening within your body. Because our brain is so smart, it knows that in order to fight, flight, or freeze, our body tends to need more energy. And so it actually turns off the prefrontal cortex, which is known as your wise owl. I'm showing you on my hand because we also teach it as a hand symbol when we're talking to children or when I was presenting it in the Overcoming Overwhelm. So if you were there, you will remember. We have the guard dog. Then on top, we have our PFC, which is our prefrontal cortex, also known as the wise owl. And the wise owl is known for making good decisions. But if it's turned off, we can no longer make those good decisions. Then there's a release of hormones that will incite the fight, flight, or freeze response, right? The adrenaline, the cortisol will go pumping through the body. The body becomes engaged. There's less logical thinking, but heightened emotions. This is not a space that we can learn, study, or retain information. And so if we're all the way over 110% into that work space, and we're not allowing ourselves to connect with others, fuel our bodies right, move our bodies well, take time for ourselves, we are definitely headed for an anxiety response. And this is something that is preventable if we do a little bit of pre-planning. So that's what today's all about. Because there are ways that we can actually navigate or offer ourselves an off-ramp so we don't have to go through the full anxiety response. And one of those that we talked about specifically in Overcoming Overwhelm was the power of mindful breath. Now, this could be as simple as box breath, breathing in for a count of 4, holding it in for a count of 4, exhaling for a count of 4, and holding out for a count of 4. If we do that a couple of rounds, we'll notice that our heart rate slows, the alarm feels less intense, and if you're lucky, your prefrontal cortex, your wise owl, will return and you won't lose the ability to make those decisions. But mindful breathing isn't the only way that we can create that off-ramp. Any form of conscious self-care can really help to bring our body back into the present moment. Now, I'm not just talking about face masks and bubble baths. Those are perfect for superficial kind of self-care, right? They are very enjoyable But self-care also needs to be looked at in a more intimate way. Setting boundaries, creating schedules, planning in when you're going to take time for yourself. Those are also forms of self-care, and ones that I want to dig in with you today. Because it's not selfish. And for some reason, we're still having to remind ourselves of this. We're still in a culture where we need to advocate for taking rest and understanding what self-care is. So let's just start by underlying the fact that it is not selfish to say no to a study group. It's not selfish to say no to studying an extra chapter when you know you need to go to sleep. It's about understanding what your priorities are, your values are, and your end goal is in order to then understand where your boundaries lie. So how do we do that? And what are they? Boundaries. I keep saying that word. And for some of you, you may actually be turned off of this webinar, of this chat based on the actual word, because you might be thinking boundaries are bad. Boundaries are things that tell me that I can't do something. Boundaries are that little rated R at the top of the movie that tells you it's restricted and you're not allowed into the movie theater unless you have an adult. Boundaries might be telling you that you can't drive unless you have unless you are a certain age and have passed a certain test. Sometimes we see boundaries as things that are stopping us, but really having boundaries can offer so much freedom, because the moment we understand where we can play, that playground, you could do whatever you want within that playground. So understanding what our personal boundaries are actually offers us a lot of freedom. It is going to help us to stay true to our values, right? If we are being asked to do something that we don't feel comfortable with, like potentially, I don't know, if a friend says they can buy an exam off of someone, knowing that your boundary or your value is integrity will help you to stay firm in your decision to say no, even when they're bullying you and calling you out on things. Secondly, boundaries can give you permission to say no. Just like I said, it's not a good thing to always be going with what other people want. No one else can live your life except you. So knowing what you need to stand for and what you want to do is really important. Boundaries are also knowing your worth and your value. It's important to know the extent of which that you're willing to provide and give into certain situations. And it can also help you align with others who share these values, these dreams, and these goals. But what about boundaries specific to exams? It's knowing when to stop studying. Yes, I did say I was an academic tutor. And yes, I do support students preparing for various exams. And yes, I will tell you that there is such thing as too much studying. There's a point where your brain reaches like a capacity point. And no matter how much more you try and input into that brain, it will not be able to retain it. And it can actually cause you to forget other things. So understanding studying techniques and studying limits is really powerful. It also is about not feeling guilty from taking away time from studying to work out or see friends. For you and in order for you to perform your best, you need to be taking care of yourself. We can't expect a car to perform its best race if we haven't taken it to a mechanic and it hasn't gone to the pit stops. It needs checking over, it needs maintaining, just like we do. They can also help you feel confident in deciding what's important. Sometimes some exams are not as important as others. So understanding this will really help you identify what you're willing to sacrifice or compromise on to give yourself that 110% work time. It's also about knowing your worth and honoring it with self-care. And that was one of my boundaries. I needed water. So how do we do it? I have created an ebook actually that I'll be sending over to you via email that highlights the method that I believe we're able to find these healthy boundaries. And it's the method that we actually take our students through. We first start by talking about our core values, understanding things that resonate with us, things that are important to us, And then we see how that connects with our why power. What is the purpose for continuing to persevere when things get difficult? What is the purpose for putting in the effort to, potentially make sacrifices? What's the real outcome? And not just the grade that you're looking for, but the bigger context. Knowing those two things can then help us create a mission statement, which would allow you to plan and put boundaries in place to honor not only your core values and understand what you're persevering for, but it will also help you to maintain that self-care and the, I don't want to say balance, but the ebb and flow between life and work. So the ebook is going to look a little bit like this. First, like I said, we're going to identify those core values. Then we're going to be talking about building why power, and then self-care, and finally establishing those healthy boundaries. So there's a couple of different personal values here that you go through. You identify which ones resonate with you. There's a couple of question prompts to help you really narrow things in and understand yourself a little bit more. We don't always ask ourselves or reflect upon, what kind of a learner am I? What do I need in order to really delve into studying and be okay with it? Those are not questions that we always ask ourselves. So giving your child the opportunity to work through that for themselves, you're setting them up for success because they're going to be able to really find a way to thrive within this season. So let's do a little bit of self-reflection. And if your child is with you, I encourage them to do this with us. If not, maybe jot this down or take a screenshot, and then you can have them go through this because I think it's well worth the time. The first question is, do I work best in the morning, evening, or night? In the chat box, I'd love to hear. Morning, evening, or night. It's interesting because this can actually change over time. When I was in university, I would actually do my best work at night. I would come home after I'd spend time at school, at work, spending time with friends and family, and I would sit down in front of my laptop and I would do the very best that I could to write that biology essay. And now I say that with, it's like almost all of those memories are flooding back to me, like, oh, those shudders. I understand the emotional trauma sometimes of going through exam season. Do I prefer to work in solitude or in a busier environment? Again, in the chat box, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What kind of a learner am I? Visual, kinesthetic, audio? What motivates me to keep working through the challenges? It's like dipping your toe into what why power is. These kinds of questions may seem easy to answer, but they're actually really powerful in enabling you to understand what's going to make your studying situation a whole lot more enjoyable and in line with who you are and what you need. So let's go through a little bit of an activity. I'd love for you to join me in writing a list of self-care activities that fuel your soul and bring you joy. I'd like for you to do it now. Good. Feel free to put it inside the chat box once you're done. Dancing, yes. Being outside with your dog, absolutely. Actually, I go through for my doggy just so I can have some time with the dog. Being with your children, baking. These are all such great activities. Working out, yeah. Going for a walk, if it's nice though, reading a good book. Perfect. These are all great self-care activities. So now we have a list. What I would like you to do now is highlight 2 hours in your schedule. That's dead time. We all have dead time. You may not think you have dead time, but we all do. This can be the 15 minutes that you're making yourself a cup of tea. This can be the half an hour that you have scrolling on social media. This can be the extra half an hour that you spend scrolling through emails when you really don't need to. We all have that dead time. It could even be sleeping an extra hour later than you need to. And you acknowledge that you don't need that extra hour because half the time you wake up before your alarm anyway. So I would like for you to take out your diaries right now, take a moment and highlight 2 hours in your schedule that's dead time. For me, one of them was waking up an extra hour early. I would set my alarm and I would be up before my alarm every single morning, not because I'm in anticipation of it, or I would just naturally wake up and I would feel fine. I feel refreshed, but I would choose to stay in bed and scroll on social media, or I would just sit there and not make a lot of good use of that time. Now, I'm not saying that dead time always needs to be accounted for, always needs to have something scheduled. That is by far what I mean. It's totally okay for me just lie in bed before my alarm goes off. But sometimes we have time that we're not using productively. And that's the time that I want you to suss out. Now that you've highlighted those 2 hours in your schedule, I now want you to schedule in a self-care activity within that dead time. So for some of you, you may have noticed that you have one block of time. On a Friday, you know that you're not very productive, but you still try and sit at the computer and you still only scroll on social media, even though you wanted to study or you wanted to do work. And so you've decided that that Friday, 2 to 4, that's your dead time. Perfect. Schedule in some self-care. Do you see a friend? Do you go for coffee? Do you go for an extra long walk? Do you do a workout? Do you read? Is that your shower, like wash your hair day, right? Like, what is it that you can do during that time that you weren't using very productively to really replenish and add joy back into your life? Not that it's missing, but add more, infuse it, because we're thinking about people who are in that 110% in that work silo. So what can we do to bring a little bit more joy and life back into that side of things? For others of you, you may have noticed that you only have a half an hour or 15 minutes, and you might think, well, that's nothing. I can't do anything during that time. And that's not true. You could very well go outside and go for a very quick walk around the block. That's self-care. Being outside is powerful. It's especially powerful for studying because being in a room, you're confined, and psychologically your brain feels confined. But the moment you step outside, it's like all these ideas start coming. Some of my best ideas have happened, mind you, A, in the shower, or B, on walks when I'm just walking. Others may feel as though you have no dead time and you're looking at your schedule and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I have so much to study. I have no time at all for rest. And I want to encourage you to remember, you cannot fill anyone else's cup from an empty cup. You cannot give what you do not have. If you do not have joy and energy and the brain power because you're so exhausted from looking at your books, you're not going to be able to give that back to your studies. You need to fit in time that is just for you in order to come back 10 times more motivated. So this is going to be the document that you'll be receiving. Like I said, there are many different pages here and a couple of different questions that will help you kind of maybe unearth questions that you, or answers that you didn't even know that were sitting on you or that you felt called to acknowledge. My hope is that this will give you a little bit of reprieve and support you and your family during this exam season, because it's not always an easy time. And sometimes we need a little bit of introspective work to help get us through it all. So I would love to hear your thoughts. This is our super speedy break crash course on creating healthy boundaries within the exam season. The thing about creating boundaries is that it is a personal journey. And so I could very well have sat here and kept preaching to you for the next 10, 15 minutes. Yeah, but it wouldn't be worth your time. I'd much rather leave it here send you over the ebook or have you click on the link so you can download the ebook and provide you the space, that dead time, to really delve in and find out what it is you need, what it is you believe, the goal that you have for yourself, how you can reinvest in yourself, and eventually what those boundaries are. Yeah, core values are such an important part to understanding our boundaries, because if we don't align with something, then, I mean, our core values are what create our boundaries, right? Especially if we're going to uphold them. Oh, I'm so glad that you think this is going to be helpful for your child. What exam are they writing? Yeah, SATs, 11 plus. We've got a good mix of families here. Yeah. GCSEs are such a tricky time because they are important. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Well, I really hope that in the next month, right, when I come back and I see you at the beginning of May, when we're in the thick of GCSE time, I really hope that this has provided a little bit of ease and lightheartedness for you and your family, and that they do find solace in being able to say yes to study groups because they know that they thrive in that environment, or no to study groups because they know that they'd much rather hunker down in their room, and that's where they'll do their best studying. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, perfect. Well, guys, this was such a lovely time to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please remember to put this date in your diary. It happens every second Wednesday for more well-being and mental health discussions. And of course, if your child requires support, either academically or emotionally, please do get in touch. This is betteringyouth.co.uk. I hope you guys have a great evening. Make sure to dive deep into that ebook, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.